We are the largest providers of visual content. And for us, visual content is a picture, a video, an illustration, a vector, anything which you can look at. And we also have a small music business. So our product is visual content, and we earn our revenue by licensing it to businesses. So businesses pay us to rent that piece of visual content or multiple pieces for different purposes. Well, we celebrate our 20th anniversary in a few months' time. And if you think 20 years back to what's happened to media, visual content and technology, I'd have to say that our strategy has had to evolve. We've had to be extremely nimble. I think to begin with, our strategy was really based on three things. Number one, this was an industry which no one had ever heard of. It was what we called a hidden gem industry. Secondly, the people who were in this industry were in the main product-centric, product-focused photographers. They never mentioned the word customer. They shot pictures of what they felt like shooting because that was what was good for their creative sensibilities, and they hoped to maybe license a picture. So what really we anticipated two things. We anticipated the professionalization of this industry, and then we saw that technology was going to fundamentally change, firstly, how the imagery was distributed, and then later on, when the cameras got good enough, how the imagery was captured. So we saw this as a professionalizing opportunity, a consolidation opportunity. We've made 130 acquisitions over the years, and then applying technology to fundamentally change the model, thereby allowing more suppliers to come to the market and also opening up the use to beyond a small group of picture professionals who had big budgets to license pictures for advertising or media purposes. So it's evolved over time, and we've had to adopt and sometimes aggressively create disruptive technologies, license models, business models, and strategies to remain relevant as the landscape around us was changing every few years. Well, we start off by saying every image from us is capable of being licensed for a purpose, either commercial to sell something or editorial to illustrate something. So the images that we have got clearances. We either own the copyright or we have contractual rights to the copyright. So that's the first thing. You can safely use this picture without somebody saying, hold on, why are you using a picture of me in a Viagra ad? That's really quite embarrassing for me, and etc. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we are very expert at anticipating trends and what advertisers and communicators will want to use to illustrate those trends. So we have something which we call visual anthropology or creative research. We make up these words. And that tells us what will be needed in the future. So we can tell the photographic community, this is what we need. This is how it needs to be shot. And we know that that imagery will sell based on, well, one, research, and two, 30 million searches a month, and selling. In the last quarter, we sold 105 million images. So we have a lot of data, and we use that big data to tell us what's in demand, and then we use more sort of demographic and more sophisticated forecasting and trends to see what's coming. And then the third piece is that with this proliferation of imagery, curation has become absolutely critical. So we're expert at curating imagery. So if a photographer sends us 300 images, we will probably take 30, and that's all. And then we will segment those into different collections based on quality and therefore different prices. I think the main change in our industry, other than what we talked about a moment ago, digitization, is user-generated content. That has exploded the market. So all of these social photography sites are really good news for us because they provide us with a tremendous amount of supply. So for example, we've had a deal with Flickr for 6-7 years. We edit the Flickr collection. We take from Flickr images which we believe are capable of selling, and we're now about 1 million images out of Flickr from 87 countries, selling in 180 countries. So we also have similar deals with IM, which is the Flickr of Europe. We've had deals with Vimeo on the video side. So we're getting all this imagery coming at us, whereas in the past we didn't. In the past we had a small number of photographers and videographers who supplied us. Now we have 250,000 individual contributors. So we have 130 full-time staff photographers, and we have 350 what we call image partners. Those are companies who do other things, but a byproduct of what they do is imagery, and we syndicate or license it through our platform on their behalf. And those are companies like, Time Life, Warner Entertainment, Agence France Presse, FIFA, the NBA, people like that. So it's very, very broad. So it's actually worked quite well. We have a number of principles, some of which are more interesting than others, but one of them is very clear, and that is that if the market is moving in a certain direction, you've got to go with it. And what we discovered about 2 years ago was that sharing of pictures was how people communicate. Certainly people under a certain age, that is all they know in terms of communication. The fastest growing apps and websites are all photo websites. Pinterest is only pictures. Snapchat is only pictures. And Facebook, according to its founder, is a giant, to quote him, photo sharing site. So what we realized was we should enable sharing. So earlier this year, we've basically said about 50 to 60 million of our images are available free of charge. You can embed them on your blogs, et cetera, provided you're not using it for commercial purposes. You can use these pictures for free, and that's just exploded. In a few months we've gone through 1 billion views, and the pictures are absolutely everywhere. So what we've had to figure out is how do you make a business out of that? Where we're fortunate is that we never had a consumer business, so it's not as if we're cannibalizing part of our business, but there's no question that there's just so much imagery that the other roles we play, like curation, service, we have 700 salespeople who are helping customers get the right picture or video for their particular project. Almost over a third of our headcount. Yeah, over a third of our headcount is salespeople. So it's a combination of a media company, a service company, and a technology company. Our business depends on copyright and respect for intellectual property. Digital, paradoxically, has made it easier to track unauthorized use of intellectual property. We have a company which is in Israel, which was clearly out of the Israeli military and then commercialized, which is very sophisticated visual recognition software. So we can go out onto the web and we know which pictures are ours, even if they've been cropped, turned black and white, have copy wording all over them. We know that. So it's actually easier for us to track down unauthorized use. That's the positive. The negative is that people on the web have been habituated into thinking that intellectual property is free. That was the early days of the web. What I would call the middle days of the web was when the technology companies decided that they needed content to be real businesses. So when Apple was a pure technology company, they didn't care about IP. Now that they generate so much revenue from music, movies, etc., they do. The same applies to Netflix, and you can go across the gamut. So there's a much more of an appreciation for the fact that if we don't protect intellectual property, there won't be any at a certain point, because the creators of intellectual property also need to eat. What I've referred to as the real threat to our industry, and I'm on a bit of a crusade about it, so I'm pleased you asked the question. The existential threat to our industry is big search, and the way the search engines behave around pictures. And that's what troubles all of us in the broader picture industry, because simply, if you go to Google and look for a book, it doesn't give you a book. It sends you to somebody who sells you the book or gives you the book if the writer chooses to give. If you go to Google and you want to purchase a toaster, Again, they send you somewhere and you buy a toaster. Music, they'll send you to Spotify, they'll send you to iTunes. If you want a picture, you click on the picture on Google Images and it gets bigger. And there's nothing on it. It's big enough to use on most websites. There's no attribution to who it belongs to. There's no warning that the picture belongs to somebody else. So we're working very hard to try and get similar standards for pictures that the search engines have agreed with other areas, which is why we recently sued Microsoft being about a widget that they put up. But that's really the existential threat to our entire industry and, frankly, without being too pompous, to creativity and intellectual property overall. So we're always conscious of it. We think that there's a lot of growth still in the B2B market because it's growing all the time, and the awareness that you need a picture to illustrate what you're trying to do is getting greater and greater. Every single business of whatever size will have a website. They don't today. And only about 10 to 15% of them today have pictures on their websites. And within that, a very small number of them have decent pictures. So the way the world used to communicate with brochures and all of that, and used to try and sell your product with brochures, it's now going to be the web. And then in addition to the web, you can't just have a website. You need a Facebook page. You need to have some presence if you're selling a product with Groupon and all the rest of it. And all of those need pictures. So the B2B side, we think there's still a lot of growth. And we also think there's a lot of growth internationally because certain markets are behind others. About 55% of our revenue is outside the US, but very little still in Middle East, Asia, and Latin America. And so we see growth there. The second area is consumer. We think that over time, the model with consumers will be that the platforms, whichever they may be, Facebook, Pinterest, etc., will make it easier for their communities to share imagery. And they will increasingly want to share good imagery, and they will generate advertising around the imagery, and we will get paid a percentage, tiny, micropayment of the advertising that's generated around the pictures. And then the third piece, which is very early stages, is we're sitting on a treasure trove of data. The data we have is fantastic for advertisers. We know of those 100 million images that were paid for and downloaded in the third quarter, and of the billion images that were embedded and viewed, billion views, not a billion embeds, we know which ones are the most popular, which are clicked on more often, where they're clicked on. When you map that on the social graph, which is not our job to do because we don't sell advertising, when you map that on the social graph, that's very valuable information. So there's some people in the company who think that our data business will be bigger than our picture licensing business someday. I don't know. At the moment, it's very, very early stages. We've got one data deal with Pinterest. Pinterest pay us for the data on our pictures, not to license the pictures, because they're very interested in what's happening with the pictures. So we'll see. So those are the three areas. And then, of course, on the other side of things, as we've talked about, is, can we continue to educate, firstly Silicon Valley and then the public, and within Silicon Valley, mainly search, around the fact that that people need to pay something for intellectual property. And so it's fascinating. It keeps changing.